Wait a minute. Who started the broadcast? As the broadcast is not starting. Sushma, did you start the broadcast?
No, I didn't. I just turned on my camera.
So,
All right.
somebody pushed start broadcast and we're not ready for the broadcast to be recording yet. Who did that? I didn't do it.
Okay, turn it off then.
I don't, the last time we did that, we didn't record at all. So we have 15 minutes. I don't know who hit start the broadcast. It had to be you, Sushma, because you're the only one that has control. So anyway, and we don't want this pre-stuff on the recording. So I'm just going to stop it.
Yes.
Okay, we see.
Yes, it started recording.
Okay. So good afternoon, everyone. Can you hear us? We're having some technical difficulties and we apologize for being just a few minutes late. If someone could kindly indicate in the chat that you can hear us and see us, we would appreciate it. And we'll wait just a few minutes. Any response?
No.
Into the meeting.
Okay. So again, we are appealing to the audience. We were having some technical difficulties. We would like to know if you can hear and see us at this point. Please either say something in recording in progress, say something in chat so we make sure that we are recording this session and we're broadcasting. Let us know. Thank you. Okay, somebody put their hands up. Okay, all right, very good. All right, well, we're in business. Thank you for that. So what are you seeing on screen now? Are you seeing the presentation? Let me see audience view. People can see you. Webcams are hidden.
I'm seeing a
Some bio. Script. Yeah,
script.
it's a script.
Okay, that's not what we want to see. Okay,
Yes.
there we go. All right, very good. So good evening and welcome to the East Coast Colleges Social Science Association's online ECCSSA Colloquy Spotlight featuring Dr. Aybar. And I'll ask you to mute your mics because we can hear all the background noise. My panelists, thank you. I am Rosalind King, Professor of Psychology and Chair of the Board of Directors of ECCSSA. We thank you for joining us this evening. It is a great pleasure to have you in attendance. We have been hosting the Colloquy Spotlight now since June of 2020, where we feature talks by significant scholars on a variety of topics related to our forthcoming 2022 annual conference, whose theme is Defining and Confronting the Challenges of Race, Racism, and Inequality in the 21st Century, a state-of-the-art assessment. This conference will be held on April 1st and 2nd, 2022, perhaps in the Washington, D.C. metropolitan area. We have not finalized a location yet. We will be doing that in the near future, and we will keep you posted. We decided on this theme long before the pandemic, the law enforcement crisis, the racial crisis, and the political crisis in our country. We passionately believe that the ongoing issues about race, racism, and inequality is a growing and deadly virus that must be confronted, addressed, and resolved comprehensively and strategically, much like we are addressing the COVID-19 virus and its variants. And since these issues are so multi-layered, we want to take advantage of every opportunity to dialogue with as many scholars as we can about the topic, the challenges, and the problems we currently face, along with attempting to assess the state of the art. Therefore, our discussions leading up to the conference and the conference itself will contribute significantly to our understanding and hopefully the production of a monograph on the subject. We are attempting to host one colloquy each month featuring a scholar on some aspect of the wide range of topics related to our theme on race and racism. We invite you to join us for future sessions and for our 2022 conference as well. You can visit our website for continual updates and look for the release of the call for papers sometimes in the fall of 2021. You can also find other details, links, and videos on our website as well, and our URL is www.ECCSSA.org. Please also connect with us on our social media platforms. We are on Facebook, LinkedIn, and Twitter. And we have our own YouTube channel and GoToStage channel via this GoToWebinar platform. On our social media platforms, we announce activities and discuss and share current research, pertinent videos, and recordings of our sessions that we host. So please find us and connect with us. I would like now to yield to other members of our board of directors present this evening, starting with Dr. Sushma Shukla, but we also have with us tonight Dr. Babita Srivastava, and hopefully Dr. Stanton Green will join us at some point before this colloquy is over. I have asked each of them to provide a brief introduction of themselves, and by that we will follow with a brief introduction of our guest presenter, Dr. Aybar, and we will begin his presentation. He will begin his presentation. So thank you again, and I hope you enjoy the dialogue with us this evening. Dr. Shukla.
Thank you, Professor King. Good evening, everyone. It is my privilege and pleasure to welcome all of you today. I am Sushma Shukla, Associate Professor of Economics and Vice Chair of the Board of Directors at ECCSSA. I would like to thank each and every one of you for joining us today, and we are so delighted to have you with us. Now, I would like to invite other board member, Dr. Babita Srivastava. Dr. Babita, the floor is now yours.
Thank you, Dr. Shukla. Hello, very first, welcome, Dr. Jose. I'm so happy, we are so happy and very present to you are here. And my name is Dr. Babita Srivastava, and I'm adjunct professor at William Peterson University and DeSales University, and I am a secretary and ECCSSA. So please, most welcome to all my audience, as well Professor King and Dr. Shukla, and most welcome to Dr. Jose. Thank you.
Okay. Without further ado, let me say a few words. You have the bio in the waiting room on Dr. Aybar, and I will just briefly recap a little bit about him and the objective of his presentation tonight. So he will be speaking on inequality, the pathway to power. And Dr. Aybar is former president of the Richard J. Daley College in Chicago, Illinois. He is also a former associate vice chancellor of arts and sciences at the City Colleges of New York.
Chicago.
I'm sorry, of Chicago. I'm sorry, of Chicago. I must have had New York on my brain. During his 8 years as president of the Richard J. Daley College in Chicago, Illinois, Dr. Aybar was responsible for the administration and oversight of a comprehensive community college with multi-campus locations with over 16 sites. Prior to this appointment, he served as Associate Vice Chancellor, as I indicated, of Arts and Sciences for the City Colleges of Chicago at the district office from 2003 to 2009. He also served as Dean of the Vail Eagle Valley campus and Executive Assistant to the President in Eagle, Colorado. He has served as executive director of a statewide commission and carried out various consultantships for the Department of Education, Department of Professional Regulation of the state of Florida, and the U.S. Department of Defense Dependent Schools. He is the author of numerous publications, including Dependency and Intervention, the Case of Guatemala in 1954, and the Panama Canal College Study for the Department of Defense Dependent Schools. He received the Administrator of the Year Award from the City Colleges of Chicago in 2005. Dr. Aybar earned his PhD in International Relations from the Claremont Graduate School in Claremont, California. He also received a Master of Arts from Monterey Institute of Foreign Studies in Monterey, California, and the Bachelor of Science in Natural Sciences from Schimmer College in Mount Carroll, Illinois. He has earned certification in 2012 from the Harvard Institute for Experienced Presidents. And Dr. Aybar writes as his description for his talk this evening that the objective of this presentation is to provoke thoughts on how to make changes in higher education to promote less inequality, even as the economic stakeholders are carving a niche in the new world economic order. Higher education's natural tendency is to preserve the status quo, but the reality is that it is in survival mode, even as students are dropping out in droves. Racism persists, and the hiring process manifests how it is done. Examples are provided regarding how the hiring process is manipulated to obtain the desired results. It is posited that a new curriculum must be fashioned to meet the needs of the United States. We indeed have a nation at risk, as is evident by the lowered rankings in international higher education. We invite this discussion by Dr. Aybar. And without further ado, please help us welcome Dr. Aybar. Dr. Aybar, the floor is yours.
Thank you very much for those very kind words. You make me humble all over again. Colleagues, one and all, it is indeed an honor and a privilege to have the pleasure of addressing you today on the timely topic of inequality, the pathway to power. We are living through difficult times, and that is an English understatement. A time when where our own personal survival is at stake, and it's not only the individual, it is humankind itself that is being affected by the events that are taking place today. The threat looms increasingly large in the horizon, and palliative measures are being put in place in order to calm the waters. And we're all aware as to the great job that has been done by academia to calm the waters, but we're still in the throes of that entire process of exchange. The threat looms through the Colloquia. The East Coast Social Science Association has taken a leading role in disseminating information regarding where we are and further raising questions as to where we're going. It is my hope that my comments today will generate understanding regarding where we have been and also shed some light regarding contradictions arising out of the legacy of these events and innovations in the present paradigm of inequality. I want to congratulate the thematic collaborators of the colloquium series for their foresight in keeping abreast and even ahead of the curve of developments. I specifically want to thank Dr. Rosalind King and Dr. Stanton Green for their generous allocation of time and support for this event. And to you all, a warm welcome to what I hope will be a provoking dialogue. The objective of the presentation is to provide an overview of the status of racism and discrimination in higher education, to examine the rationale that led to innovation and reform in academia. And we need to go into the very essence of how academia was formed to get an idea of what the challenges are that develop from that. To provoke thought on major structural constraints that may be critical in the development of what happened?
Yeah, sorry. Oh, cancel. Okay, sorry. Can you see the screen?
No, I can see the screen, but not the presentation.
We see you.
Oh, really? Okay, can you see the screen now? Sorry about that.
No. No, we still see, now we're just seeing the presenter.
Oh.
Ladies and gentlemen, regret the pause. We're having some technical difficulties, but I am going to nevertheless continue because I know that time is of the essence and we have a lot of information to cover. But in terms of objectives, the other two objectives that I want to mention are to pose major factors driving change in the U.S. socioeconomic milieu, and to promote the urgent need for reconsideration of the concept structure creates function, or is it that function begets structure, for the developing inequality in academia post-COVID-19. Now, in the process of preparing for the presentation, I made some assumptions that are critical to my thinking and to my organization of this entire presentation. The first one, and perhaps the very basic one that is extremely important to me, is that knowledge has no color or gender. And that is something that is at the center of
What happened? Can you hear? Can you hear me? Oh, okay. So now I don't know what happened. Okay. Okay, continue.
in the process of preparing for this presentation, I made a number of assumptions that I think I need to let you know what they were. First, and the most important one, is that knowledge has no color or gender. And this is a concept that seems logical, seems natural, but is not often stated as in this fashion. The second one is one that I learned a long time ago, and the idea was that by your students you'll be taught, but the concept, the assumption is that students have an insatiable curiosity to learn. And it is just a question of finding the right elements to make that happen. The third one that is also of great importance for me is that learning does not take place in a steady upwards projection. It takes quantum jumps, it moves about, and it moves in space and time throughout all the continuums and all the dimensions. And third, the infrastructure of learning is an impediment to the learning process. And by that I mean, and I will explain this in the process of the presentation, that we have an infrastructure that believes in the banking system of education. And that is essentially a depository system where we put information into a square, and we expect that at the end of the day, that will be the end result of it will obtain a good result. This is a concept coming out of Paulo Freire, and it's part of the basic framework of this presentation. Okay.
Oh, gosh. Sorry, I don't want to be on the screen. I'm trying to get the PowerPoint back up, so please continue. And I'm trying to figure that out, why we lost the PowerPoint. So forgive me for that.
And finally, in terms of the assumptions, that there's no agreement and uniformity in college education today across the United States. Now, the conversation with you, the dialogue, is about racism in academia. And let me simply state categorically that racism is alive and well in academia today. Now, it is not there because I say so. It is because the major players in higher education have in fact said so and acted upon it very clearly. Specifically, the president of Princeton, Eisgruber, in a letter to his faculty and staff at Princeton University, stated that racism and the damage it does to people of color persist at Princeton as in our society, sometimes by conscious intention, but more often through unexamined assumptions and stereotypes, ignorance and insensitivity, and the systemic legacy of past decisions and policies. Racist assumptions from the past remain embedded in structures of the university itself. When he made that published, when he published that particular statement, he drew an immediate response from Secretary DeVos, who launched an inquiry into Princeton racist comments.
That's the old one. Okay. Keep going.
And This is Rosalind.
Okay, it's coming. Sorry.
Is that the new one? Yes. Okay. Could you
You see
please
it?
get it?
Yes.
Could you please forward it to the Secretary of Education, DeVos?
It's
Like
Yeah.
about the fourth slide.
Okay.
Keep going, please.
Okay.
One more.
too much.
Two more. Sorry.
Okay.
One more, please. There we go.
All
Well,
right. Got to get this in slideshow mode. Keep going. I'm sorry.
all right. So essentially, Secretary DeVos said, all right, you have said that you have Princeton has admitted that to racism, and we're concerned about the entire concept of the entire legality of the things that you have done. And you have signed agreements from at least 2013 to the present, and all of those agreements may have been false. So she further stated, or that at least the Department of Justice stated, that these the assurances that were being made by Princeton University at that time were false, and they are concerned about the Princeton's many non-discrimination and equal opportunity claims students, parents, and consumers in the market for education certificates may have been false, misleading, and actionable, substantial misrepresentations in violation of the Civil Rights Act. So they opened an investigation, and the results.
Next slide.
The next slide, please. The results provided a number of interesting things for us in higher education. As part of the internal process of doing the right thing, Princeton proceeded to establish a committee, a faculty advisory committee on diversity, to provide further leadership and oversight regarding the department's recruitment and retention procedures, financial resources, and curriculum development. So here we have a clear statement of Big Brother is watching you. Now, universities across the United States proceeded to respond to this entire event, and over 80 colleges sent a letter to the boss saying that they should stop the entire investigation process because they were moving along the right path to correct all of these things that were being done. The point of the Princeton example is simply to show that a president takes bites the bullet and makes the statement that racism is alive and well at his university. Further, he does proceed to, in all fairness, he does proceed to establish a certain number of what I would call palliative measures, including the committee, so that we can then proceed to say that they're doing something about it. And that is a natural response in academia, to set up an advisory committee of some sort to review the whatever it is that is under the challenge of the day. However, in this case, it goes well beyond that, and I will be providing more comments on the potential role of these advisory committees as we proceed. The Princeton model, the Princeton model statement simply is a generalized statement of an admission of racism and discrimination. It does not provide details into what was going on, but simply a blanket statement. We have this problem. We're going to do something about it. And then the investigation ensues. And we go on from there to, but that is a generalized statement of racism and discrimination at Princeton University. The next slide, please. Is a series of Ivy League universities who have a similar problem, but this is a little bit different because it is a complaint put forth by the Asian American Coalition for Education, and this went against Dartmouth, Brown, Harvard, and Yale, alleging that the Asian American students, the admissions of Asian American students were being lowered in number, and that those numbers were then going over to Hispanic and African American students. Now, in the case of Dartmouth and Yale, and Hartmouth, it was dismissed early because of lack of insufficient evidence. However, Yale and Harvard provide some insights on the nature of the admission challenges. So in the first case of Princeton, we're saying that it was generalized in the university and across all of the university structure. Here, we're saying is that one piece is located directly in the admissions process. Next slide, please. In the case of Yale, the Yale subjects, Yale claimed that its race discrimination was necessary to admit sufficient number of racially favored applicants, mostly Black and Hispanic applicants. So this is a clear admission. It's a statement of admission of what Yale, in fact, was doing. And Yale signals that racially favored applicants cannot compete against Asian and white applicants, and that this kind of race discrimination relies upon and reinforces damaging race-based stereotypes. So again, this is a statement coming out of the Department of Justice, indicating that Yale, in fact, admits that it is doing race discrimination and that it is favoring Blacks and Hispanics over Asian Americans. Next slide, please. Yale proceeds to deny any wrongdoing. And they, of course, do what we do in academia very well. And they brought in a consultant, and they brought in an equity consultant from Duke University. And Benjamin Rees then came to the conclusion that, yes, the infrastructure at Yale was sorely lacking, and that the proposed diversity training is of little long-term utility. So this is telling us two things. One, that indeed that there were challenges at Yale in terms of racial discrimination, and that the measures that they were envisioning at the time were not adequate to what was to take care of the need of the challenge. Now, as events would have it, the complaint was started in 2020, and the change in administration proceeded to do something very interesting. And the Department of Justice dropped the lawsuit in a notice of voluntary dismissal without giving any reasons for its action. Next slide, please. So essentially, this is a statement that that states that very clearly that the new administration condones that which was taking place at that point in Yale. At Harvard, it's again, the DOJ found in its complaint that Harvard University had a race-based admissions process. And again, the benefit is to the African American and Hispanic applicants. And what is damning in this particular complaint is the statement that where the DOJ, the Department of Justice, observed that Harvard had achieved this by systematically and impersonally marking all Asian applicants as having less integrity, being less confident, and assuming that they are less qualified leaders. The point ranking that was done apparently showed that these were the multiple categories that were used to mark down the Asians students who were applying for admissions. The U.S. Court of Appeals ruled that the school's admission process was flawed. It was not on account of racial bias or conscious prejudice. So you draw your own conclusions as to the status there. Next slide, please. So the previous slides that I have brought to your attention, the idea is that that racism is structurally present in our colleges and universities. It is, and taxpayers, by virtue of billions of federal dollars being allocated to the colleges and universities in the U.S., are paying for a hierarchy of structural racism in our higher education system. Now, the changes in the presidency have reversed the various inquiries that were being carried out by the previous administration and have reversed the proceedings, thereby, you would say, consciously allowing the flow of federal dollars in violation of the tenets of the Civil Rights Act. The colleges and universities bonded together out of fear to lose their privileged status in the pathway to inequity. And Band-Aid committees have come into being so that they can take a look at diversity and show that there are bona fide efforts to address the issue. Now, advisory committees are just that. They are advisory to the, and this is a two-edged sword as a result of the power components that come into being as a result of it. And then it's interesting that the training programs that Greece mentions so nicely, he indicates that training programs in diversity do not necessarily produce the results that are expected from them. But however, this is a natural thing for all universities and colleges to put in place, because they're trying to really address an issue which is in front of us and which is not going to go away just like that. How can this be so? Next slide, please. How is it carried out? Well, there are numerous points of where you have the insertion of racism into the process. And one of them is, for example, the appointment of a chair committee who is going to make the appropriate decisions as to who gets hired. Another one is to the scrutiny by a chancellor or a president of a college's candidate list for hire prior to submitting it to the Board of Trustees. Now, normally this is done anyhow, but these are two places where culling can be done regarding the entire process of administration. And I would like to take this moment to pause to speak to the damage that the racial divide has caused. I went to Shimer College in Illinois, and it was one of the greatest experiences of my life in terms of education, and it really provided the formative block, if you will, of everything that I have done since then. And however, in the second year that I was there, I had a friend who was my basketball buddy and at Shimer, an African-American young man, handsome, virile, full of life. And it was Easter, and he went home with, he went to his girlfriend's house for Easter, and at that point he was going to propose to her. She was white, and it was they were very much in love, and this was the way that they had decided to proceed. The young man came back to the college after the Easter sojourn, and a couple days later, he committed suicide. He had proposed to, he had told the parents that he was interested in marrying their daughter, and had been rejected by the parents. And this is a memory of racial discrimination that scarred me for life. And it is one example of the entire process of discrimination and its impact to individuals in the process. The other thing that I want to say here is that is also of my personal experience as president of a college. Before I got to the presidency, I had been a candidate for presidencies a number of times. And in one system, I was told directly that I was the wrong kind, and that I could not be hired for the presidency because I was the wrong kind. This did not deter me, and I continued the process of application until finally ended up as a president of Richard J. Daley College. But the statement is jarring, and it is certainly one that speaks to how candid the utilization of power by someone in authority and how it is used. And it is simply a deterrent for some, but it wasn't a deterrent for me. And I continued to move forward in terms of my search for my passion in higher education as an administrator. Now, this is simply to point out to places where a structure of racism comes into being. And the personal anecdote is one that simply stands at the root of it for me, because I have been constantly on the watch for elements of discrimination and racial injustice throughout my history as a professional. However, there are other elements in higher education that add to this, but from a different angle and need to be examined as well. And that is where I'm going in the next section of my presentation. Slide, please. But before I go there, I could not help myself as I was reading the memoirs of David Rockefeller. And the gist of this statement is that I have the power, and this is Rockefeller speaking, and this is a simple summation of this statement. I'm part of a secret cabal that bankers and I'll do whatever it takes to be in charge, and I'm proud of what I'm doing. So he is telling us from the top that there's a design that is being followed, and he really doesn't care who is affected by it, as long as he is maintained in power at that point. Next slide, please. In this particular statement, also by David Rockefeller, he simply states that the media is in cahoots with the power brokers of the United States, and that it would have been possible for us to develop our plan for the world if we had been subjected to the lights of publicity during those years. So there is a structure of power that coincides with maintaining inequality in the United States. And that is where part of the contradiction lies, because on the other hand, we are believers in the principle of democracy and equality and all of the good things leading to the apple pie. But at the end of the day, the movers and shakers are in concert with the powers that the bankers and the elite of the society, and they're deciding the national direction, whether we like it or not. But that they have a plan. And this is simply a very interesting statement, because it's an admission of I do not want to say a dark past or darkness, is simply a statement of the use of power and where it has been. Next slide, please. Now, I'm going to take you back to the origins of specifically the entire concept. Next slide, please. Of colleges and universities in the United States, and there are a number of stalwart figures that were the ones who made this entire thing happen, the structure that we now have in education. One was Robert Maynard Hutchins, and he was chancellor at the University of Chicago. And next slide, please. And he was responsible for the Hutchins system of education, which ultimately ended up in the design of Shimer College in Illinois. But before that, William Rainey Harper, also chancellor of the University of Chicago, came up with the concept of the junior college. And to him, it's not just the junior college that he designed. It was actually the tiers of education that we have even today. Next slide, please. And in the same time period, we also have Andrew Carnegie. Now, Andrew Carnegie is not known for his philanthropy alone. He was also known for being a good businessman. And he was the singular developer of something that is very dear to our hearts, and that is the Carnegie Unit. And we'll relate the pieces together in a moment. Next slide, please. And along the same timeline, a little bit later, are three thought partners who were dealing with a concept called the civic culture. And they were the ones who defined what America looks like. Looked like all the way till the 60s and 70s and even to the present. And the reason why they did this, I hope will become increasingly apparent in the process of my next slides. Thank you. Next slide. There we go. Now, what we know as college today did not exist in that fashion in the 1800s. There were no standards. There was no uniformity across institution. There was lack of agreement as to what was being taught. There was no agreement as to what constituted time on task. And there was no agreement on grade and college boundaries from educational institution to another. There was no demarcation between high school, college, and research university. There was a total lack of consistency. And the chancellor of the University of Chicago came across the solution to the problem, and he was singularly important in defining the tier system that we have today. And he proposed, next slide, please. He proposed that that there be a division, and that and proceeded to suggest that there be something called a community college, and he divided the University of Chicago into a junior and senior college, and also carried out a pilot at Shimer College. And then in July, later on in 1905, there was the formation of the first junior college in the United States, which was Joliet. Now, the extent to which he felt very strongly about this, and he attempted to coerce colleges who had four-year colleges who were having trouble staying alive to drop the first 2 years of college completely and leave that to the junior colleges. This was a time of chaos and they were trying to deal with creating uniformity across the United States in terms of that. We're not talking about great numbers. There were less than 30 at the beginning, and you didn't have large classes of students. As a matter of fact, I believe the first class at Joliet Junior College only had 6 students. Now, there were two, next slide, please. There were two divergent paths that were created. The one was the junior college a la Joliet, and the other one was the junior college at Shimer. because Scheimer in 1896 was part of the University of Chicago. And the divergence was in terms of methodology of teaching. And Chancellor Hutchins at the time instigated the Great Books curriculum and Socratic method into the Scheimer Academy and then the Scheimer College. And it was an experimental junior college, and it became a four-year institution in 1950. Now, all is said and done, the Scheimer bears a distinction in that it was ranked number 3 in the nation in the percentage of graduates who go on to earn doctorates. I'm just putting that in as an aside, very proud of that, but that has simply a spillover in terms of the research that I have done into this process. But the point that I'm trying to make here is that in terms of the division of education, and I'm going to hone in particularly on the community college and the junior college, the two systems divided. One almost disappears, which is the Scheimer College, and the other one continues to grow as time progresses. Please, next slide. Now, the Carnegie in this period comes up with what is called the Carnegie Unit. And I'm shifting from the structure of the college to a piece that governs curriculum, and that is the Carnegie Unit. Now, this is something that was originally devised at Harvard in the terms of the contact hours, and the Carnegie Unit comes into effect in 1906 and continues on today. Next slide, please. Now, what we don't know about the Carnegie Unit, it was not meant to be used as we are using it today. It was meant. This was a quid pro quo between Carnegie and the proponents of education and the division that they had created, so that if you wanted to be a college, you had to have the Carnegie Unit in place, because they needed that Carnegie Unit in order to run the pension system. So it was a quid pro quo that came into being for the purpose of standardizing instruction across all colleges in the United States. It sought to standardize students' exposure to subject matter by ensuring that they receive a consistent amount of instructional time. No one's mentioning here what is being taught. That's simply a statement as to this is the amount of time that it takes for you to get an education. It's an input-based model, and a model that is now being forced to accept output functions. And no consideration has been given to the cognitive aspect of learning, i.e. how students learn. Next slide, please. Let me restate for you one more time. The Carnegie Unit is a unit. The Carnegie Unit is a system developed in the late 19th century and is defined as 120 hours of contact time with an instructor. 1 hour of instruction a day, 5 days a week for 24 weeks, 7,200 minutes of instructional time over the course of an academic year. The Carnegie Unit does time. Does time equal knowledge? Next slide, please. And this is simply a system that's designed to measure inputs, and it cannot be expected to measure outputs. And that's what we're trying to make it do right now. And this is becoming increasingly more vibrant, a dysfunctional characteristic of higher education insofar as we're expecting it to measure outputs. Next slide, please. So to sum up this particular section, we have the formation of junior colleges. We have a curriculum with divergent pathways to education, one based on the inquiry model, one based on the deposit, the structural constraint of the Carnegie unit, and we have the beginnings of a civic culture that is going to gain an increasing dimension in the years to come. So what I'm trying to point out here in this section is that the reasons why we came into being have and the entire conceptual framework of what we do is different from that which was originally envisioned at the time. So there's a basic contradiction between what we're doing now and what we wanted to do then. But I'm also raising the question in the process of, is this really by design, or is this something that is happening through the evolution of systems, and we'll see where that leads. Next slide, please. Next slide, please. One slide back, please. Okay, thank you. Now, this is a timeline that I'm going to gloss over in some fashion, but you'll get the gist of it in a second. In 1905, Japan defeats Russia. Okay, that by itself is a historical fact, but it led to the discovery of Japan. And that is a very interesting statement, because as a result of that, you start seeing the teaching of Japanese language at Harvard University during the time period. It was also the publication of the work by Einstein on relativity. And it was also the formation of the junior college. This was a banner year in every respect. Shortly thereafter, we came up with the Carnegie unit. And then World War II hit. And you're saying, well, okay, Dr. Aybar, this is great. It's a timeline, but why is this important? It is important because right around 1945, to be more specific, 1947, a gentleman named Ills from the United States went to Japan. Could I have the next slide, please? And Ills was the advisor on higher education in the Civil Information Section at General Headquarters for the Supreme Commander of the Allied Power. In short, Ills was there to make sure that the Japanese universities were doing the right things in terms of following the dictums of the United States. So one of the things that Ills was in charge of and he was called it was called in Japanese the Eel's Typhoon, or the Red Purge, is that he went to the universities and asked for the dismissal of Japanese professors that had communist leanings. And this not only proceeded, he personally went to the universities and made this happen. Now, Eel's is there was one of the side actions or spillover effects of Eel's Red Purge was that many of the Japanese professors committed suicide as a result of loss of faith in their societies. But Eel's comes back to the United States and becomes a central figure in drafting the objectives of the junior college. Central among them was the inculcation of American democratic principles and emphasis on civic responsibilities to the returning GIs. Next slide, please. Now, remember that earlier on, I mentioned the advisory committees that are being formed throughout the universities in the United States. This is both a threat, a peril, and there's also a positive thing. So I'm just cautioning the effect that we're having in terms of this entire concept of the advisory committees, because it could lead to the entire concept of Big Brother is watching you as we deal with freedom of speech and the fine line between the right to speak out and the right to make any statement on any subject, as long as you're doing it from an academic point of view. So this is simply a cautionary statement that I'm making in terms of where we're going, and this is again part of the letter to the press, the letter that the Harvard president wrote. Next slide, please. Next slide, please. Could we please go back to the other timeline so that I can finish that up?
3 slides back.
3 slides back. One more. There we go. Thank you. So Eel's comes back to the United States, and he then becomes a central figure in the formation of the new community colleges, the new junior colleges in the United States, who were then given a great deal of support by the US government in terms of the GI Bill. And as a result, between the years of the GI Bill and its end, there were 7.8 million veterans who took advantage of the GI Bill, and then we also had, at the same time as this all was happening, we were having the McCarthy trials in the United States, so as to make sure that we were on the right path in our fight against ideology. The point that I'm trying to get across is that this was a formative period in which ideology played a major role in what we were doing in terms of the curriculum of higher education, specifically in the junior college, at the junior college level. And we introduced the courses in civics, and we stressed the community aspect of democracy, and that was a large part of what was being done in terms of the beginnings of education at that point. Now, in addition to that, these were terminal degrees that were being given. They were not meant to be a progression into the 4-year schools. So they were meant to be vocational in nature, skills, and continuing ed. And that, in fact, became evolved over time to further expand the mission of the community college specifically into one that is provides a full range of education, but it's one that is not clear what the actual mission of the college is. And that is where we have very little agreement into what are the functions of colleges in the United States at this point, particularly as the information age becomes has an impact and becomes increasingly visible in everything that we do. The civil rights movement in '64. I'm just doing highlights. Continued a series of mass movements to obtain equality and to really set the stage for we're all human beings, and we need to have the access to everything that all together. It isn't one kind over another. And I pause for a moment to note in the process that the Nation at Risk came out in 1983, and it pointed out that our standards in education, not our standards, but our ranking in education was falling below that of the other nations in the world. And that slide has continued. And we're now down to about 17 in the scale in terms of high schools. All right, let me go quickly on to the next slide, please.
3 slides ahead.
3 slides, one more slide ahead, 3 slides ahead, please. All right, this slide is really meant to show you that the entire process of educational reform in the United States is very slow. And this is the example that I'm choosing is Harvard. And it shows the various points, the interval of time between each reform. And so far, we have actually shortened it to 30 years or so, but it's simply to show that reform does not happen well in higher education, does not take place in a fast manner. Next slide, please. Next slide, please. All of the evolution of higher education has shown that we're right now dealing with a number of contradictions, but we don't know exactly where they are in the structure of education. And we need to hone in on where they are and then deal with them. But right now, we're essentially moving into a crisis mode. And the crisis is being highlighted by the following 3 items that Dr. King mentioned earlier. This is the year of the coronavirus. This is the year of protests against systemic racism, the year of the most divisive election in history of the United States. Next slide, please. To which I would also add that there are a number of the evolution has caused it to have structural elements that are also alien to its initial mission. As a result, academia is in survival and crisis mode. Now, we're surviving, but are we? Next slide, please. Now, in academia, we have seen that we have decreases in enrollment. There's loss of revenue, and there's even the inability to meet degree requirements. This is some of the short-term effects of the coronavirus and the economy being what it is. Next slide, please. At the same time as this is happening, we're seeing something very interesting in terms of the socioeconomic pyramid of the United States. This is a representation of what it used to be. And this is the classic economic pyramid of the United States. Next slide, please. This is the new visual, and I'm just putting it together for our representation. And this includes the bankruptcy of some colleges and universities, but there are two other factors affecting this exacerbation of the pyramid. Next slide, please. Sorry, hold on. And that is that there is a massive transfer of wealth that is affecting the demographic distribution of this U.S. socioeconomic pyramid. And that the cumulative effect reports that 1% of the Americans have taken $50 trillion from the bottom 90%. So there's been a reshifting, and as a result, we have more people in the lower class displaced by the economy and the other factors that are and the multiple deaths that are taking place in our system. So the entire pyramid, the structure of the United States has changed. Next slide, please. Now, at the same time as this is happening, the rate of change from design to product completion has increased. So that means that, and two examples of that are, of course, the production of the COVID vaccine and also the production of a new fighter plane in the Air Force Next Generation Air Dominance Program, where they were able to produce this fighter in 1 year as opposed to 10 years. So the innovation is in fact increasing in terms of this entire shakeup that's taking place right now. And these are discrete examples of some of the forces that are affecting higher education today. Next slide, please. So altogether, we have four elements moving forward. We have the economic displacement of population segments. We had a rate of change that's increasing. We have COVID-19, and we have loss of revenue. And at the same time, we have mass movements taking place requesting equity and equality. And that is the nature of the place of change where we find ourselves right now that is so critical for our development. We have a structure of the college that is based upon archaic measures in the structure, the Carnegie unit, and we have a method of instruction that is primarily based upon as a depository on the lecture method, even though there have been many changes in education, and I know that there's more than that taking place today, but still the predominant one is some sort of lecture method. We have not taken advantage of the cognitive studies that have taken place in the United States over time. And as a result of that, we are really not looking into how students learn. And that is a most important component that needs to be reviewed and examined and acted upon as we proceed forward. Next slide, please. Now, this is simply to put a representation of academia as a closed system, and it would, in a sense, it is the nature of systems to try to maintain themselves as they are, to look for the status quo, and this is just a thought that we're acting as if we were a closed system. Next slide. And finally, I have 3 representations of stages of a new system development. The first on the left shows academia being impacted by call it viruses, if you will, and being bombarded. And as each one of these elements moves into academia, it causes changes and expansions of parts of it, but academia itself doesn't change. The next slide, and the next representation in the center, it's where the system opens up and a dialogue emerges, and it's a dialogue that completely goes to the core of all of the elements that compose academia. And nothing is left that is not reviewed in that process. And a new academia, in a sense, comes into being that is in tune with the digital world. And then there's the final one, which is, and then in this center one, the academia, the system opens up for maybe 6 months, a year, 3 years, who knows? But in that time period, the dialogue takes place, and it is explosive. It is dynamic. It is a place where change is accepted. And where ideas are really discussed that are going to shape our future. And then the last one is where the system closes up again. Now, in the center, going back to the center one for a moment, if you remember on the housing bubble in 2008, all of the procedures were in chaotic disrepair. And slowly the system started to come back together and develop a new set of procedures, and then the system closed up and it became one. And that is the thought behind this one. So I leave you with, next slide, please. I leave you with the thought that there's an urgent need for reconsideration of the entire dialogue going back to the history of biology, that structure creates function, or is it that function begets structure, for the developing inequality synthesis of academia in the post-COVID-19 world. And what I envision at the end and what I'm looking at right now is something that is the confluence of all of this, is that we're really looking into a renaissance of academia, and we're already seeing pieces of it coming into being. The question in my mind is, how will you contribute? Will you be a participant or an object? Are you ready to take on the charge? Thank you.
Thank you, Jose. Can anybody hear me? This is Stan Green. Hello, Jose, can you hear me?
Yes, sir.
Yes, we
Great.
can hear you. Yes.
Thank you. Thank you, Jose. I apologize. I had a COVID shot, brain cramp, and I missed the beginning, but I didn't miss the beginning of your talk. And I thank Rosalind, Sushma, and Babita for jumping in and taking over for me. First, I want to thank you for the talk, and it's great to see you. As I was going to mention in my introduction, Jose and I know each other for, I don't know, 30 years, 40 years, I don't even know, I've lost track. But
was
and it is really important, I think, for people with the wisdom and especially the accomplishments that you have, Jose, um, to speak out on these issues from the big picture, in terms of meeting the challenges of racism in a broad sense. And that's what you've done tonight. And as a college president, that's sort of the broadest picture you can give with regard to higher education. I also want to just make one comment, which you said academia doesn't change very quickly. Well, I noticed in the news yesterday that Harvard won't give Cornel West tenure, so he's going to leave. Well, Columbia wouldn't give Margaret Mead tenure either, and that was 70 years ago. So, no, academia, it's a tough nut to crack. And the most interesting thing I learned from you before I asked my question was I didn't know the origin of the Carnegie unit, and that was great that you mentioned that. I've always tried to say that, learning doesn't occur is not divided into 3 credit classes. Yet everybody seems to think that, and you explained it. It has nothing to do with a 3 credit class. It has to do with a pension plan. But I wanted to just hone in and ask you a question in terms of racism, especially from an Hispanic perspective. And I'll use a personal anecdote of mine. I was was invited to be at a workshop in Onondaga Junior College in Syracuse. And after the talk, it was a diversity workshop. After I gave my keynote, a Hispanic student came up to me and asked me some question. And of course, he said, I apologize because I don't speak English very well. I, of course, said, no, you speak it perfectly fine. And I don't speak Spanish at all. But what that translates in terms of, to me, racism and privilege is that if a white student had that same situation, they would say, I'm fluent in Spanish. You know what I'm saying? If somebody who is white and first language speaker, spoke English, Spanish as well as that young bright student spoke English, the white student would say, I speak Spanish fluently, and it would be granted. It would be on their resume, it would, et cetera, et cetera. And to me, that really presents the inherent structural, cultural racism, and in this case, at a junior college level, which is something you've been focusing on. So I'd like to hear your response from the point of view of an Hispanic in higher education, your personal, you've given a couple of personal anecdotes, but also your professional response to that. Thanks.
Well, I have a little anecdote that that pertains to that. And you will be particularly sensitive to it. At one point, I was the associate director of a center, international center in one of our pristine universities.
I know that one.
And I was in an elevator, and I heard a student speaking Spanish. He was from Colombia. And I chimed in and I started having a conversation with him in the elevator. In the elevator, there was also another person. And then I went back to my office and started doing my work. In the process of doing my work, I get a call from the director of the center. And I had been reported to the director of the center for speaking Spanish in the elevator.
Yeah. God.
So I then said to him very politely, I thought that this was an international center, and that as an international center, all languages are fair game. I mean, I speak Spanish, French, Russian, and I'm proud of each one of those as well. Now, tell me, what is it that I did wrong? He said, well, there were other people in the elevator who thought that you were making fun of them. And the lack of understanding leads people into places like that, and also leads people to speak loudly, very loud, so that you can understand what is it that I'm saying. And that type of reaction is exactly what we're trying to get away from. That's one piece. The other thing is that there are Hispanics and there are Hispanics. Which one are you talking to? Are you talking to me, a Puerto Rican? Or are you talking to a Colombian? Or are you talking to a Brazilian? Or are you talking to who? I mean, and don't misunderstand me, just because we are within the category of Hispanic doesn't mean that we get along well together either. So there's also internecine political relationships that need to be maintained. And as I started out my career in looking for a job in higher education after graduating from Claremont, this was when the Chicano movement was getting started and moving forward. I found myself in a difficult position because I was not the right kind. I was a Puerto Rican looking for a Latin American slot in a Chicano world, and it wasn't happening. And those are part of the issues that you face in this entire process. But that's part of the evolution of the entire concept of racism as it develops in the United States. What I'm really trying to get to all of us to consider is this: we have excellent opportunity coming up in the next couple of years to redefine what we do in education, to take advantage of all of the psychological studies that have been done that are simply sitting on a shelf and not being incorporated into the teaching and learning. For example, I'm just going to use one very simple example. This entire division of students into visual, oral, and learners, we have known this forever. And as a matter of fact, I'm very happy that Rosalind brought this to my attention the other day. But so what? Okay, we know it. How do we use it? Okay, we have not. In other words, we have a lot of innovation that has been, a lot of stuff that has been done about how people learn, and we're not incorporating it into the teaching. To this, we add the fact that we're now digitizing this entire process and making it less personal as a result of the of technology, and we're even taking that away. But we need to be able to include those cognitive aspects into the teaching and learning process in the new digitized world.
Okay, very good. I would like to just elaborate on that for a few minutes, because there are some who are trying to be innovative in the classroom, but it is not widely available to students. And so they don't, when they see it, they think it's something different, that you're doing something wrong, because they're so accustomed to mundane teaching and learning. And that structure has been very closed. You talked about academia being a closed system. And I guess my question for all of us to think about, but especially to address directly to you, is what is the purpose of education? That's the first thing that we have to decide on. Is it education to produce a status quo? Is it education for holistic development? Is it education to produce a mass workforce? Is it education for knowledge versus being able to solve our everyday problems and become well-rounded individuals? What is your view on that? And I think that if that is not answered, I'm not sure where all of this is going. And I see us constantly repeating the same mundane mode of instruction and education that we have had for quite a long time. And there have always been at least two schools of thought in academia: those that are in that old traditional model of education, and then the constructivist views who are trying to do innovative things, who are trying to cultivate and develop individuals holistically. And the two have not met yet. And so how do you see that being resolved in the future? I'm getting pretty hopeless in terms of all of my years in academia, and being the odd person out for trying to do innovative things, which takes much more time than having students become programmable robots where they're regurgitating information that they have rote memorized and they don't understand. And never getting any recognition for the hours that are put in to really try to help students learn holistically and to apply information in the real world in real ways. It's a real dilemma. It's a very frustrating experience for those of us who are trying to do some of those things.
Rosalind, I'm happy that that the process of my dialogue hit a few points of interest with you. I share very much the same type of conundrum that you have stated so well. I would suggest the following, and this is what has served me well throughout my entire from my formation to where I'm at right now. And that is that education, the role of education is to further the cause of inquiry. And if we're able to produce a student who has the inquisitive nature, and that is built into the curriculum to make that that inquisitiveness come forth in the space of an inquiry, then everything else falls into place. It almost falls logically, naturally, as a student develops. It's an infrastructure of inquiry. That's what the great books did to me, and that's where my formation was all about. The professor was a facilitator. He wasn't. He was also a magnificent center of knowledge. Don't misunderstand that. But he was not there to deposit knowledge into my brain. He was there to take it out of me because I had the answers. And if you have the answer, then you have it. It's all yours. That entanglement is what happens in the classroom. That is where the real engagement of education takes place. All of the other questions, they fall into the depository system of education. And banking is great for bankers. They make money out of it. We're not making any money out of it, but we're certainly producing a structure of racism and discrimination that inquiry does away with. Because if you're looking for something, if you're examining and evaluating things, then it becomes yours, and it doesn't matter whether there's no color to it. Inquiry has no color. Knowledge has no color. Or gender.
Okay, thank you. I have one other, I have a lot of questions, but I'm going to ask this one, and then a couple of questions came in by email. I'll raise those as well. But you made in your statement for this overview of your talk tonight that academia has not been able to agree on what are the elements of college education. The stakeholders have been vested in protecting the turf of their field of studies rather than the lofty ideals of the ivory tower. Crassly put, the ego is the electric currency that is used to maintain and expand power holdings in academia. The lack of societal status for professors and teachers in academia further promotes an inequality wherein knowledge is power and it is deposited in measures into a bank. Can you elaborate on that last statement, the lack of societal status for professors and teachers in academia further promotes an inequality wherein knowledge is power and it is deposited in measures into a bank?
Okay.
What are the criteria for the bank, and is it greater for those faculty that will do as they are told in academia? I'm just
This is I have been in meetings where professors have been vying for their specific course. This may be a very specific course in history that they are experts in, that they want to teach. The reason why they want to teach that course is because they don't want to make another preparation, perhaps, or they're simply making sure that their niche within the framework of the course structure that they have at the college is maintained. And how do they maintain that? They have to put their ego into it, because there's no money. It's only the power ranking within a department becomes one of ego and age, if you will, rather than the need of the student. This is again the structure of the curriculum then becomes a function of what is it that the professor is willing to teach, wants to teach, and that's it. He doesn't want history. He doesn't want to do history 101. He wants to do Assyrian history because he's an expert in Assyrian history, as an example. So that's the nature of that dialogue. But when we come to status in society, what is it? The statement that is being made? I am having a challenge with collecting it. Teachers.
That the lack of societal status
No,
for
no, not that one. But teachers teach, and I'm sorry, I'm having a moment here that
You teach as you were taught. Is that what you're looking for?
oh,
no,
okay.
No.
but it'll come to me. But the point is that if you walk down the street and somebody asks you what is it that you do, you say I'm a professor at the university. Okay, move on. There's no social ranking, if you will, in our society for the holders of and the dispensers of education in the United States. Whereas in other countries, and I'm going to say the European countries, there's a there's a status related to being a professor at a college or university, whether it be no matter where they're located in the process. There are people that you look up to because of their wisdom, etc. But that does not seem to be the case here in the United States.
Yeah, I guess I would say that for some colleges and institutions, that is the case, but not for all.
I'm not making a blanket statement. I'm just making a specific statement to some of the observations that I have made throughout.
Yeah, and so then the question becomes, what are the functions of a college in this age, this day and age? That's something I think that really needs to be looked at very carefully. And I would also say from my observations, not all institutions are the same, but a lot of them are very rigid in what they're doing, in the mechanics of everything, in the courses that they're offering. And there is no leeway for those professors who want to create new courses and to create things beyond just the courses, their routine courses that they are experts in. And I can tell you that from firsthand experience.
I agree. I totally agree with what you're saying, but I would add the following: that as this crisis continues, and as the forces that I have pointed out to continue to converge, that bubble is going to really expand and break. And when it breaks, the dialogue to which you refer to is going to take place. Now, we may not be able to decide, which we haven't done in over 500 years of education, as to what the objective of education is. But we may decide that there's some things that we can agree upon, and that will be the formation of that new system of education that will come into being 3 to 5 years hence. And I'm not I believe that we're at a point in time of a renaissance of higher education. And it is also a renaissance that is converging on our society as a whole. Now, when I say that, I also say that we also have responsibilities within this renaissance. And, I'm going to point to two drastic examples of the things that are happening that have taken effect, that have had an effect elsewhere. Remember when I talked about the purges, and I talked about the watchdog committees and the potential threat and peril? Well, do you also remember that a teacher was decapitated in France not too long ago as a result of showing caricatures of Muhammad, the Prophet Muhammad, in the classroom? That is one potential effect of some of the things that are happening right now. President Macron very recently came out with a statement essentially accusing the United States of cultural imperialism. Now, he is doing that because of the fact that the same type of malaise in terms of committees to preserve this minority or this other thing is happening in France right now, even as we speak. We are exporting our entire malaise, if you will, to France. And he is saying, look, I am charging our intellectual elite in France to develop its own autochthonous and indigenous process to deal with these issues. We cannot continue to be affected by what happens in the culture in the United States, because they're dealing with their reality and we need to deal with ours. And that is how far this is going. But this is moving worldwide. This is not an American phenomenon. By the time we're through, this is going to be all over the world.
Okay, thank you. And Stan, may I ask the questions that the audience, there are two questions that were posed by the audience for Dr. Aybar. One is from Gene Grabner, one of our board members emeritus, and his question is, would our speaker address the distinction between equality and equity and provide examples of where each applies and where each should apply?
You know, I have a great deal of problems dealing with that question, because they really they really merge in terms of where they're headed. Equality for me is more of a legal concept in terms of how it is applied, and equity is more in the nature of the balancing act that takes place, particularly as you deal with recruitment committee in terms of establishing what is being called racial quotas at various colleges and universities. So, but the issue is it's not equality or equity. The issue is, how do you deal with the inequality? And this is there's a societal dynamic here at issue that is provoking, that is continuing to maintain that inequality, and that inequality is inherent in the hierarchical structure of our society. So as you look at the socioeconomic pyramid that I showed earlier, and look at the expanding of the bottom base, what we're dealing with is that is the new inequality that is being formed, and it is not just based on the racial minorities. It is based on everybody moving down. So maybe the new equity at the end of the day will be a system where you have segments combined of everybody in the bottom of the pyramid, and that then becomes There's equality because everybody has the same chance to be equally unequal.
Okay. Okay. So the next question is, what strategies do you recommend for institutions of higher learning then to promote more equity in recognition, promotion, and upward mobility for minority faculty?
I would suggest that they hone down and deal with the concept of teaching and learning, and really do the best that they can to create change in that area, so that the focus is all on teaching and learning. If we continue to focus on the challenge of racial discrimination, we need to deal with it. You misunderstand me. But we'll lose track of what the central mission of the college or university is. And that's something that there's no agreement on, so that is wide open.
Right, because there's a lot in the literature on the absence of inclusion in institutions of higher education for minority faculty. And just focusing on the teaching and learning still does not get the best minority faculty who are doing great jobs any recognition, any promotion, any rewards whatsoever. And it has to be addressed. It can't just be, as far as I'm concerned, teaching and learning, because a lot of people are doing a great job with that. In the minority population of faculty at higher ed institutions, but they're not getting any recognition, and they're being excluded from in many, many ways, including promotions and upward mobility and opportunity to grow.
Absolutely, I agree totally with what you're saying, Rosalind. As a matter of fact, in the earlier part of my description of racism and discrimination here in the United States, I specifically mentioned the role of the hiring committees and all of that. I've had numerous examples that in various institutions where I have been, where the process of discrimination has really been visible. And but Rosalind, let me give you an example that is very close to my heart. There was one point when I was hiring advisors, and the entire system was hiring about 40 advisors across the board. And these each college had about 10 or so to hire. A college that was primarily of one minority went ahead and hired and proposed candidates of that persuasion for the hire, and that was blessed, and that was okay. Another college had a different makeup in terms of the diversity component, and 8 out of the 10 were of a different persuasion, to be more precise, Hispanic. Okay, now within as the candidates were proposed forward, all of a sudden there was a president who got a call from the chancellor saying, "What's going on at your college?" And the end result was that every resume that had been proposed for that particular hire was scrutinized and had to be sent to the central administration for review. So this was in a sense a reverse discrimination taking place within the institution, even as you were trying to balance out the requirements of the college in terms of the hire. The point being is that you still had, quote unquote, the best candidate that had arisen within the lot, but in one case it was blessed, and in the other case it was not. And simply that way of maintaining control, and it's almost impossible to break, not impossible, in order to break that particular closed loop, you actually had to go outside the system and have forces be exerted from outside the system in order to make it happen. And there's not every professor has the access to the power holders in order to make that happen. And
Right.
and so the structure, the way the structure is built, it's not working. It's broken, and it needs a type of activism in order to make it happen. The fact that you put in a watchdog committee at a college doesn't mean that it's going to have the power to handle that particular issue. And
Yeah.
you know, I agree with the need to do the two things, to focus in on the teaching and learning, but as a process of inquiry, not as a process of a position, and then to proceed to hammer away at the structures that exist in order to make your voice heard.
Okay. And my last question for someone who sent it to me, and then I'm going to turn it back over to my colleagues. Is there potentially a role for private four-year liberal arts colleges to collaborate with two-year state technical colleges for expansion of online educational support and virtual cultural enrichment into remote, rural, and low-income communities? This comes from Robert Pollock, and I'll forward these questions to you in case you want to answer them personally.
The answer to that question is absolutely yes. The college needs to devise a niche type of program that would be developed in conjunction with the technical colleges or other institutions, and then proceed to deliver that through a digital framework. There's definitely hope there, but you have to find a very good niche in order to be able to do that.
Okay, very good. Thank you. I yield to my colleagues. I know there's another question in the chat box if someone wants to talk about that, and we turn it back over to Stan, our moderator. Thank you so much. Thank you. It was very informative.
Thank you, Rosalind. Thank you, Jose. I don't know what the other question is. Do you have it, Babita or Sushma? Is there another question you have in the box?
Rosalind, no, Rosalind, if you see that, you can ask the question. I don't see it in my box.
Who asked it?
Me either. I can't see any questions. Yeah.
That person, there was a question there. Wait a minute. I said hello. There was a question there from Cher Deerling, but I don't see it now.
Okay.
Yeah.
Okay. All right.
All right then. Yeah.
So, colleagues, do you have other additional questions for Dr. Aybar?
I don't have any question, but I would like to comment. Thank you so much, Dr. Aybar. Your presentation was very informative, and I have some more information, I would say, about United States educational history, and I didn't know about Carnegie as well. So thank you so much for giving this presentation here, and it was really nice to see all that. Thank you so much.
And Dr. Srivastava, do you have any questions?
Actually, this is a wonderful presentation. It's already question answer was there, but Dr. Jose, I want to ask. I want to share one thing with you, please. Like as you mentioned about the language thing, like English is a first language, something like that. So I have experienced it's like someone who do not understand my English, so I had to say sorry. And if I do not understand, I have to say sorry. Both way, I had to say sorry. So you mentioned very good. Really, I tell you, it's a great information. Thank you so much.
You're welcome.
Okay. And I would say finally, Dr. Aybar, you mentioned Harvard University, which is my alma mater. If Harvard is slow in evolving as an institution of higher education, which in my opinion, the learning is off the charts, it's the best experience I've ever had in my entire life, then can we imagine what other institutions are like? So if you're saying that about the highest in the land that is doing a better job with that, even though it's not up to standard yet, it's still evolving, what about all of these other institutions? And I've worked at 10 colleges and universities. So if they're still evolving and that evolvement is slow, what are the other institutions? How would you characterize them? And that's the final question.
Well, the objective here of my presentation is really to provoke thought, and I have a feeling that I've done that.
Yes, you have.
And
Seven.
the fact that I chose Harvard for that timeline was because it came so natural once I started looking at it in terms of putting it together. I have, and I must say, Rosalind, and with all due respect, I have but the highest respect for Harvard and its accomplishments and all the good things that it has brought forth over the years, and it's still considered the pristine institution internationally in the rankings of colleges and universities. All well said and good. It has also been a prime example of some of the very things that have damned the last 10, 15 years of academia, specifically in terms of racial discrimination and the other aspects related to that. So it is both the good and the bad. Great in terms of learning, but not so great in terms of everything else. So
Yeah.
the question is, how do we deal with a governance structure that condones or maintains a structure of racism? And that is ultimately the evolving question that we're faced, not just at Harvard, but throughout the United States. My contention is that as the bubble starts to ferment, and as the mass unrest related to George Floyd and everything else continues, the crescendo will actually make the meld possible to cause the change to take place. We're creating a new norm. And the question is, what is it going to look like at the end of the day?
Okay.
This is what my 3 diagrams at the end of my presentation are about, simply showing that the bubble is fermenting.
Okay, very good. And I have no evidence of that whatsoever in my 4 years at Harvard, and I was a part of faculty and programs, all of that. I did not witness that. So maybe that's something that is a sign of the new times where that is happening. And I do recall that suit going forth. So thank you for that.
And they won't get Cornell West tenure. Remember that.
Well, that's,
we don't have to go into that.
Yeah.
We don't have to go in. I know Cornell is a controversial guy, but he's also a remarkable public intellectual. But in any case, let's end on that. Thank you, Jose. You have certainly provoked some thought here, and I want to thank you very much. I'm only disappointed in one thing. I was hoping to hear some Rahm Emanuel stories, maybe next time, because you did work with him, I know, in Chicago. You don't have to say anything, but I can only imagine if you're talking about power, there's a man of power. But I'll leave it at that. Thanks for everybody, for the panelists. Thank you to all the participants. Please join us in our social media. Please know, and I think we'll be able to keep in touch with you, but please keep in touch with us at exa.org. And we will be having, hopefully, a face-to-face real conference, not that the virtual is not real, but a face-to-face conference in April of 2022. We've all agreed the pandemic will be over by then. Let's see. And also, EXA does produce a very fine journal, and we ask everybody listening, and perhaps Dr. Aybar would be interested, to submit to the publication, and you can find the information on that on the website again, www.org, exa.org. Am I missing anything? I don't think so. Anything else we want to mention other than thank you?
Our journal is open source, and so you will find issues of our journal that you can read in their entirety on our website as well, under the category of the ECCSSA Journal. And many of the topics that we're discussing right now, we have discussed and addressed in previous conferences. So we invite you to read our journal.
And it has been published for how many years now, Rosalind?
Since 1990, since 1988. Since
Okay.
1988, yes.
So there's, okay. So thank you again, everybody. Thank you for your time, especially Dr. Aybar. And I look forward to seeing you again, Jose. And I hopefully am now COVIDized. I apologize for being late. The last 2 days have been hell, but I would tell you, get your COVID shots. It's worth it. And that's what I want to end with, a practical note. Thanks, everybody. Thanks to all my colleagues, my fellow board members, and everybody have a great evening.
Thank you. Thank you again,
Thank you.
Dr. Aybar. Thank you. Good night.
Bye-bye.
Thank you so much. Thank you, everyone. Thank you.
Thank
Good night.
you. Good night, everyone.
Good night. Yeah.
Good night.